got my grains for a koji I'm inoculating, currently steaming, and I'll be inoculating that with some spores from a fungus called Aspergillus oryzae, or Aspergillus. This is the problem with doing a lot of reading to learn. I have no idea how to pronounce a lot of this stuff, but I'm trying. The common name for that is koji, and it's responsible for a ton of things you already know about. It's miso, soy sauce, sake, and a lot of other things in Southeast Asia that you may not have heard of. Also, it shows up in katsuobushi as part of that whole very long process for katsuobushi. It's an incredibly useful mold in the culinary world, as well as some other industries. And that's because it has such a diverse catalog of enzymes that it'll use to it. And kind of the way that fungus work are they surround something and then they eat it. And the way they eat it is they figure out which enzyme will fuck it up the most and break it down. And we kind of catalog enzymes into a few different categories. And there's, more specific ones for more specific molecules, but when we have ones that break down carbohydrates into smaller sugars, those enzymes are called amylase. And a lot of the reason koji is initially so useful, especially for making sake, is because most grains, when they're soaked, have their own amylase that becomes activated by having enough water to move around in. So, like when you brew beer, you soak your barley, and it will start to convert itself from starch into sugar, which you then use to feed yeast and make beer. Rice doesn't do this on its own. So, through, hundreds and thousands of years of experimentation, really specific strains of koji have been domesticated from another fungus called Aspergillus flavus. And that was, that's how we came to have koji, and there's different breeders who breed slightly different versions of the same species. And these slightly different versions can be better at some things than others. So they'll be useful to different people. But in general, most koji is the same species, Aspergillus oryzae, but there's also a few other species that are used from the Aspergillus genus or family. I forget how that whole phylum tree goes. And actually have some examples of some different species with me because I was curious and wanted to try them. Okay, so these are all ones I got from a company in Europe that grows koji spores and other cultures. In Japanese, that's called kojikin, which means koji seed. They're spores, not seeds, but you're talking about things people found 1,000+ years ago, so they can call it whatever the fuck they want. Okay, so got Aspergillus oryzae, that is the common koji. This is Aspergillus sojae, sojae, and it makes a drink called soju or sojae. So people use this to make a different type of alcohol in Japan that's pretty similar. These can also grow on a variety of substrates. It's not just the rice, which is the most common, but millet, barley. It's grown on a lot of different grains. It can also be cultivated to grow on other substrates, and in the future I will go into a lot of that because I will be working with koji a lot. Last is Alucensis, which I'm excited about because this one produces citric acid in addition, and I'll be doing that down the line. And this is actually, whenever you buy like citric acid or you have something that has citric acid in it, that acid, though you can get it in citrus, is a lot easier to just grow with a species of Aspergillus. I think it's Aspergillus niger, is the one they use for that. And there's another thing to be careful about though, is black mold. The sort of black mold that infects your house, you get aspergillosis, and your lungs don't do well, is also in that same genus. And I will be being very careful about it for that reason. Been wearing a face mask to protect me from those spores, just in case, because I don't want anything that's close to that in my lungs. And then I'll be wearing gloves so that I don't bring other bacteria into it. I got off topic here with the... So, koji has a bunch of different enzymes available to it. The two main ones it has are amylase, which break carbohydrates down into smaller sugars, protease, which breaks proteins into down into smaller amino acids, and the last one, which isn't as common, is lipase, which breaks fats down into smaller fatty acids. And the really cool thing about this is that whatever you grow koji on becomes bigger flavored because of it. You're getting these smaller molecules that are more flavorful. If you think about eating potato versus eating sugar, that's a good example of how the starch has these longer, more complex molecules, and your tongue just interacts with them less. Whereas the sugar is a much smaller molecule, and it has a lot more availability to interact with the things around it, which makes it more flavored. And the same applies to proteins and amino acids and fat and fatty acids. Yeah, so that's just a really quick overview on enzymes. There's other types of enzymes that do a lot of other different types of things, but at least for this purposes, those are the types we're concerned about, because they're directly changing flavor. A whole nother day we can go into different types of enzymes that you can use in cooking, because enzymes are really fucking cool. I dig hard on them. But we'll take it a thing at a time, right? Since we've got people watching and all. Let this cool out a bit faster. I don't want to inoculate this yet, because if I were to inoculate this right now, a whole bunch of the spores would just fucking die, because this is hot as shit. It'll kill stuff. Oh, actually, I want Fancy Boy drug scale. Except I'm actually using my scientific scale for scientific shit. Alright, so let's tear it out. So this doesn't say that it's been diluted already, but I kind of suspect that that it has. Either way, I'm going to dilute it a bit more just to make it easier for me. Okay, so I'm doing this says 1.5 grams for 400 grams of short rice. I'm almost there. I'm gonna go ahead and do a full 1.5 grams or a full 2 grams because I fucked this up. All right, 2.1. I'm just super scientific, right? Because in my experience, the amount that they told me to use wasn't really a great amount. And I want this to grow aggressively during the first 24 hours so that nothing else has a chance to compete with it. All right, so what do I do with that spoon? Okay, so adding some cornstarch to that to help it make it easier to spread. Tear this off again. Oh man, cornstarch is messy. Okay, so I've got 4 grams of cornstarch, a 2-to-1 dilution. That's fine. Write this down. Get off my scale. And clean off my cutting board real quick here. Alright, so these spores are being dispersed throughout this cornstarch. Hopefully that's not too much, but we will just experiment and see how that goes. And next time we'll know. So yeah, right now this is just barely warm. That's going to be fine. I'm gonna put this in my strainer or sifter sieve and just lay it across. Yeah, I think this is probably too much cornstarch, but we'll live. Alright. And I kind of want to touch this as little as possible so I'm not introducing extra possible contaminants. I'll be looking at a microscope later that I brought and looking at some examples of some contaminants, and we'll just creep on some microbes and dick around with the microscope. It's not a great microscope. It's a little $20 dude that I got on Amazon, or I guess like 25. But it's fun. Get to look at stuff. Okay, so this has been pretty well dispersed. Fold this up, and I will set up the incubator. Okay, so this incubator I've slightly overbuilt because I didn't know what I was doing. It starts with a cooler for keeping temperatures more even, more easily. Then we've got a seed heating mat or a reptile pad. This would normally go at the bottom of a like a terrarium, or if you were making, I guess, seeds and trying to germinate them during seasons they don't normally germinate, you'd use that. Okay, this is the fancy bit. This is a temperature controller, and what it does is it shuts on or off depending on this little probe thermometer here. So this probe I put directly in the grains so that I know what their temperature is. This gets that information, and depending on what temperature I've set it to, it will either turn on or off. This one is made for heating. There are also ones made for cooling, and there are ones that are comboed, but the principle is always the same. It just has a thing. It turns all the way on or all the way off, depending on what the probe thermometer tells it. Your oven thermostat almost definitely works like this. Your home air conditioning thermostat may or may not work like this, depending on how sophisticated it is. But that's the basics of an incubator. They also make ones for humidity, which I'm not using today, but I'll be trying to keep this at about 90% humidity for the first day, and then about 70% humidity for the next 2 days. So I'll be putting a little bit of hot water in a little pan in there to get that started, and then tomorrow I'll take it out. So this will be going in the Koji. Let's make the, I guess I can borrow the hot water from here. Okay, so next up, a little bit of hot water going down in a bowl. And this is just going to be to help with the humidity, so I don't need to spray it with a spray bottle. Okay, so I'll be putting my koji off the heater and off that water bowl. So this is just a spacer to hold it up. And then I'll be using the same sort of perforated pan, hotel pan. And usually I make larger batches of koji. Right now I want to take a batch of koji all the way to spore so that I can use it again in subsequent things. I've not been real successful with that in the past, so I'm using a smaller batch just to experiment with that, and hopefully we'll get something good and figure out a good process. Okay, so I've got this. I'm going to be placing my koji in there, and the reason I don't want it, the reason I want these perforated pans, or you can also use like the traditional just wood boxes. Bring this up here. The reason I want that is if it's too humid, the fungus can start drowning because they need oxygen, and bacteria will start taking over where the fungus aren't able to compete. So just having it on a towel, having a perforated pan is insurance against that. I still want my humidity to be high, so after I put the probe thermometer in this, I'm going to put some plastic wrap over it just to kind of ensure that. So thermometer probe, and I can even bunch this up a little bit more because I'm working with a much smaller batch than I normally do. Thermometer probe goes in here, right in the center, and that will be measuring the temperature of these koji. I'm gonna go ahead and fold this off to the side. I'm not gonna plug it in here because I'm gonna go plug it into this other outlet, but this will give me a reading of how hot it is. The first 24 hours while it is starting to inoculate and it hasn't really started eating this this wheat, it'll be helpful for me to provide it with some outside heat so that it grows really well. But after that, it will be producing a ton of its own heat, and I'll actually need to take it out of this cooler so that it doesn't kill itself by essentially cooking itself. And at that point, we can also lower the humidity, which will encourage the mycelium from the mold to dig deeper into those grains, which is what we want, because then it's going to produce most of those enzymes, and those enzymes we will use to make a lot of tasty stuff. All right, so that's about how that's set up. First I'm going to yank the probe out like an idiot. And put a little extra length here so it doesn't jerk out later. And I'll even try sticking this to the... That's not going to work. But I'm going to give it a little extra length so my probe doesn't just come flying out. Build my mound here. So those spores will start coming undone. They'll make these little filaments called mycelium and start reaching towards each other. They'll start binding these grains together, and those spores will actually mate with each other. Fungus gets really complicated when it comes to reproduction, so I can't even speak on that. It's really weird. And so I'm just gonna put some saran wrap over this. The holes will still be open, so this koji will be getting oxygen, but I want to keep it limited so I'm not losing all of my humidity. And I don't really want any water directly on the grains, because that's an invitation for bacterial contamination, which is the opposite of what we want. So I'm going to put some wrap on the boy. I used to hate anytime I had to work with cling film so much, and I still kind of do. Here's an example why. It's just a fucking bitch to work with. I have kind of a long-standing hatred towards cling film, but from 5 years of working in the restaurant industry, I can say I've gotten a bit better at it. Alright, that was mostly painless. It's sealed up. Don't want any more moisture escaping than I need to. Come on. Alright. That's gonna be okay. Alright, so I'm just gonna slide this into my incubator. I'm going to put the lid on, but I'm not actually going to close it all the way tight because I want some air to be able to get in there, and then also if temperatures are getting too hot or something, I want to be able to adjust that or take it out altogether. So that's that. I will plug that heater into this temperature controller. And this isn't one, this is just a really basic one I wanted for this setup, but Inkbird is a company that makes really good temperature and humidity controllers. Eventually you'll see me using more of them. I have a few more in over in my room, and more of them will appear in the lab. Especially as I start making stuff like soy sauce or garum from the koji that I'll be making here. And those things require specific temperatures as well. We might make some different misos out of things other than soybeans. There's a lot of interesting work right now going on in the world of koji. Noma put out a book and a bunch of people went crazy for it. And some people who've been doing koji for years and years and years recently put out a book called Koji Alchemy. It is wonderful. I'm reading through it currently. So if this is something that piques your curiosity, hit me up. I will get you introduced. It's a whole thing, and it's fun. Okay, so I'm gonna move my incubator up here. Got this little slot for it, which is nice. Here we go. Slide in. And then I'll just plug this in. It'll give me the temperature. What do we got? This is from a batch of koji that I had made a few weeks back, and it got colonized by another contaminant, and I don't know what that contaminant was, but we can start to look. Okay, so where the green is, those are koji spores from the type of koji I was trying to grow. And where the black are, those are spores from whatever fungus was having a war with the. I'm glad we did this microscope part. This is cool. Okay, so I have to look at my computer to see what this is saying. Okay, so the green parts are koji spores. The black parts are fucking another spore. It's probably another species of Aspergillus, but I don't have any proof. Those little white fibers and stuff are going around are the filaments of mycelium. Koji is considered a filamentous mold or a filamentous mold. So it sends out those little strands and stuff to connect to other stuff to find it, and eventually when it stops finding stuff at the end of those fuzzy little tips, it'll grow spores there so that it can like jizz all over the earth and grow more koji. So that's what we're looking at. So this little sample right here has more koji of the kind I was trying to draw. It's winning the battle over here, but if I flip it around, I don't know why this camera keeps stalling. That's really annoying. Is there a way to just refresh this? I'll have to figure that out. Alright, sorry about this. I'm still having trouble with learning this stuff. Buffering auto. Okay, I'll try and figure that out. Okay, so now we have a different area where it's a little more matched between the koji we want and the contaminant. You can see the same stuff's going on here. You got the little buddies fighting with the little buttholes. That could have been more clever. Jane, you are looking at a fucking war. Also, man, they did that Japanese dude, like, real fucking dirty. Tickets back to Japan. Alright, so yeah, fucking koji, little filaments, those white dudes are little spores. This is definitely not a... Let's go ahead and see if we can get a good shot that's even... We're zoomed in? Okay, so that's zoomed out. We're gonna go closer, see if we can get... Yeah, exactly. Spores playing Battleship. Yes. So we're trying to do microscope work with a thing that is a very cheap camera that can do a very high zoom. And it does a surprisingly good job of that. This This thing keeps freezing up on me. I don't know why that is. Let me see if turning it on and off will. Does that? No. Ah. So annoying. Yeah, it like encounters some bit of lag or whatever, and it just decides to freeze. Um, okay, so we're gonna try and do like a really, really tight shot to see the most close we can. I've got it all the way zoomed in now, so we'll just try and find a focus that works. Again, we're working with 1,000 times magnification right now, so that's any little movement it makes is like fucking gigantic in the terms of its focal length. All right, there we go. We're getting something into view. Hey, Fragola, how are you doing? We are looking at Koji that has been contaminated in a microscope right now. It's a little microscope camera I got on Amazon for like $25, and even though it's super cheap, it finds some like cool stuff. So we are looking at a yeah. These are some barley grains that were inoculated with Koji, and we'll zoom out to get a bit of a bigger picture. Okay, so this is what we're looking at. The green stuff is the Koji that it was originally inoculated with. That's what we wanted. And then the black stuff is what contaminated it from the environment. And they fought like a battle between them before I just let it dry out so they couldn't do anymore. So I had to throw that batch away because it got really contaminated. But it is cool to look at with a microscope. That is a mold war. That's kind of the end of the stream for today. I did some other stuff. If anybody wants to check out the VOD, we did 3 types of fermentation. We drink coffee and a little bit of knife sharpening. I will hang out for a little bit now, and then we'll raid somebody.